Hello friends, are you ready to garden together today? I always think it's fun because it feels like on these videos we can just garden together. And really what this is about is all about some things I'm going to be planting in shade areas today. Now, obviously we pick and choose different things to plant at different times. In the spring, usually plants are just more plentiful in the garden centers. It's easy to find the full selection. So a lot of times I end up doing a big push of planting in the spring. And then when we get closer to summer, it more begins the maintenance, the upkeep, maybe the watering, depending on the year. So this is going to be about planting in really two shade areas, which happen to be the only areas that I can plant shade-loving perennials. So it's all about the shade-loving perennials that I'm choosing. I'll also show you a couple others I have in those areas that I'm not planting but already have. Now, I have mostly a shade area back here underneath what I call my hosta bed, which is in my backyard. And it's all the way kind of between two trees, a maple and a crabapple. And it encompasses a part of that new pathway I put in last year. Now, I've always wanted shade because I think, we live out in an open area, and while we have some big established trees, both where I grew up across the road and here, it's never been a full, large area of shade at either house, the house I grew up in where my mom lives now, or where I live now. And so I think I've just always craved having more shade because you always want to plant the things that you can't plant, right? But this is the things I can do. So we're gonna plant some different varieties of hosta. I'm gonna plant some algal Japanese forest grass that I love. And both of those can be a little bit tricky depending on the areas you're going in. So I'm gonna talk about how hopefully I'm gonna combat that. And what I'm gonna do about combating underneath these trees, which can be a little bit of an issue. There's dry shade and there's more wet or at least damp shade. I don't have wet shade. I definitely have more of a dry shade. Maples tend to have more shallow roots. So this area also being exposed to the south, getting lots of breezes during the summer can dry it out quickly. So I'll talk about that. If you remember a couple weeks ago, I started in this area and I planted some hellebores or Lenten roses. I did quite a few of those, and those are my first planting in this area. This is going to be my second and eventually last. I probably will add in a few more hosta as one does, and then we're going to go right by the porch, and that's where I'll plant the forest grass. So this area is kind of my only shade area other than where we're going to go next, which is right up by the house right there. But this area you can see is kind of a conglomeration of different things. I have not put mulch down yet. I brought the bed out larger this year, and I'll put mulch down now after everything is planted. I kind of wanted to wait till I was done, digging in the dirt and actually making more of a mess, and then I'll put things down. So last year, up by the pathway is when I started planting some things in this area. And I planted the hosta that we're gonna plant today, some more of on the other side. With hosta, I've gone back and forth. There are sometimes I've tried to just have all different types of hosta, and then times I stick to maybe a few different varieties, which is what I'm trying to do today. I'm trying to match some of the ones I have on this side. In the middle, I planted last year some Sum and Substance, about 3 of them all throughout, which get nice and large and have a lighter green color. You can see on this side, I planted some of my favorite Sun King Aurelia. It's a beautiful, see how simple it is, and it has that lime chartreuse green color, and it can adapt well to a drier shade, which is why I did pick it for here. Now that it's been in a year, I'm really excited to see how it does. The hosta are the one I'm gonna have to watch, but when we're going up here, you can kind of start seeing the hosta just in 1 year have really grown in a lot. I'm gonna mimic these colors by bringing them out around on more the backyard side here, which you can see I have all of them setting down in this area. Now, this was a new one for me last year, and this is the same one I'm matching there on the other side I just showed you. I really like it because it has, within time, it gets more of a yellow on the edges of the green. It opens up white and then gets a little bit more yellow, which I really like. And I'm going to, behind it, put some guacamole hosta, which I've had before, and I really like the guacamole. So these are all you can see intermixed with all those hellebores that I planted earlier. And so now I'm going to be going through and just adding to it. So after the hellebores are done blooming, there's going to be lots of texture and color from the foliage and blooms. I happen to like hosta blooms once they come in. Anytime I'm going to plant hosta, the few things I do think about is what kind of soil does it like? Now I live in southern Iowa, and I have a nice loamy, kind of rich black topsoil. So that obviously isn't going to be a problem. Hosta do like a slightly acidic environment. So when I fertilize them, I'll use Hollytone. But I have to start thinking about that because hellebores, on the other hand, don't need an acidic environment. They like a more neutral. So overall, I usually keep this area neutral and just will fertilize either with a plant tone year to year if I want to, or like a garden tone from the Espoma series. But what I'm doing here is just adding these to the edges. And with this first one, I did make sure to check always on both sides, the overall mature size. You know, that's something that I feel like when I was starting out throwing plants in here, 14 years ago, I wasn't really paying attention to the sizing of certain hosta, because you want to make sure you do notice that while they usually give you a large size, that usually includes the flower stalk or stem they're going to get, which can go a couple feet above the actual hosta foliage. So when you're seeing the size, don't right away get too scared thinking some of them are too big. Also remember that that full mature size happens in usually an ideal environment. It can be slightly on the drier side back here. So on dry years, I do have to supplement with water. And in that case, since it's overall a little bit drier, they don't quite get to the size they usually say they will. Now, in certain areas, they definitely do. So it depends how happy they are, how perfect that area is for them. But one thing I will say is hosta have vigorous roots. And you can see here, if I bring this up to show you, see how beautiful and vigorous those roots are? That's how I always decide how much to open up those roots when I'm going to plant. When they are very tight like this, it can be hard for them to actually receive water when you water them. So if you can just go through very gently and open it up, see how I'm just opening it up? That's gonna help it actually be able to branch out into the native soil we have, and it's not gonna hurt the plant at all. It always looks like a scary thing when you're doing it, but it actually is gonna be super beneficial. So what I wanna start by doing is digging my hole. Now, the one thing I do say under certain trees, maples included, and this is a maple tree behind the camera, is they can have pretty shallow root systems that can really branch out and be pretty dense depending where we're planting. So if I start noticing I'm getting into an area that is very dense with roots, I try to rethink about planting something there, because you're always going to be fighting the tree roots taking the moisture. They could grow into the space that really starts diminishing that hosta. And really the best example, and my mom would agree, is over at my mom's house. In the backyard, we used to have these gorgeous big hosta under a tree, maple tree again. And over the years, they kept getting smaller and smaller. It's because those roots kept getting larger and really taking that water. And that's just what happens. And if you overwater under a tree, it really starts to push those roots up. So you really have to be careful about doing that. So in the hole, I'm always gonna put some Espoma Biotone. You know I love to use Biotone. And honestly, I think every year I keep using it, which has been quite a few years now. But remembering to a time when I didn't use it, to watching now how the plants react differently when I do use it, it really is just a root stimulator that really helps these roots acclimate very quickly to a new environment. Now, in this area, if I needed to, hosta do like well-draining soil. They don't like to sit in water. I would definitely add compost if I had an area that was compacted or had a lot of clay. I would add in some of the land and sea compost or some of my homemade compost. But what I'm doing is just making sure I tamp around this area. That's perfect. And now I'm gonna go on and I'm gonna keep planting. I'm finishing up with a couple Blue Angel hosta here in the middle. Blue Angel is actually one of my favorite hostas, and for some reason I've never really planted one. It has a slight green to blue color. It's not pure blue, but it does have a nice kind of blue-ish hue to the leaves, especially as they mature. Now this can be a large one in its full size. Now it says like 32 inches to about 70 inches wide. Now that's close to 6 feet wide. I have yet to see one that gets that big in my kind of area, but I will fully embrace and love if it would get that big, because I have big spots here in the middle where I'm putting 2 of these. Now again, that's gonna be with the ample amount of moisture it would like. I doubt it will quite get that here. But the great thing about hosta is, as they do get large, they love to be split. So they're really the gift that keeps on giving if you have a really good one and a healthy one. You can very easily split it, put more in your area, give some to friends. It's kind of the best of both worlds. Make sure to always tamp it down and then water it well. Now, right now I've been sitting at a time, we're in early May still, and I always try to tell you the time, even if this gets posted a little later. I want you to know what time of year I'm planting things and what it looks like. We're still getting some good rains right now. There's a lot of good moisture in the ground, and we're having a big rain coming. So that's why I'm trying to get all this in the ground, because then the rain will water it. Now, if I don't get at least an inch of rain a week, I'm gonna need to be watering these things a couple times a week to make sure they stay hydrated. If we get at least an inch, I'll more monitor the watering and the moisture level and water them in between as needed. I do want to show you on these established ones that, well, they're not established, but I did put them in last year, so they obviously have more size. If I might actually already go in and see how it has kind of a separate plant. It's not really, but you can already, now, granted, in the first year, you sure don't need to do this, but I can't find more of this variety and I still want a few more on that side. So I don't feel bad about going in and taking a little bit of this off. It's a small start, but that's kind of the beautiful thing about a lot of perennials. You can go in with your spade, get a chunk of it off. I'm making sure to go nice and deep to make sure I get some good root with it. But look how I'm able to pull it out. I'm trying to do this one-handed so you can really see. But if you look at all that beautiful root structure with this one plant. So I'm gonna go ahead and stick this in a hole I had dug, put some biotone in it, and already these plants are giving me more in just 1 year. I'm gonna mulch this obviously, but now I'm gonna go about 20 foot to the east, and we're gonna talk about the only other shade area I have. So you can see this isn't that large of area, but I think it's gonna look nice with all the hosta filled in. Now, just like hosta, they can get down to zone 4, a lot of them down to zone 3. I am planting some nice cold hardy things up in my other shade area, which is right on the west side of my front porch. So there's my front porch, and while it faces the south and gets a lot of hot sun in front, you can see right here where I have these Helen von Stein lamb's ear, or stockies is what they are, it stops because the lamb's ear start not doing really well when it starts to get pretty much full shade right beside it. But what does do well are these wonderful all gold Japanese forest grass. Now these are zones, I believe, 4 through 9. They can get down to -20 to -30 degrees Fahrenheit. They also slightly naturalize by their rhizomes, so they'll kind of slowly start making a larger mound and naturalizing. Now, I planted some on the north side at my mom's house and it stays slightly moist, and these do so well. I have to watch the moisture level here, and I definitely will have to supplement them with water when we get dry in the summer if we do. But this lime green color, I'm gonna show you why I really want it here because it sets off and complements what's already planted. So this area is anchored with a Japanese maple, which has that nice deep burgundy color, but it also has that same Sun King Aurelia behind it, which has that chartreuse color. So these are gonna really complement that Sun King Aurelia by being the same color in front, and I want them to naturalize here in front. I have a few planted in the back there that are just beginning to come back, but then these I want to sweep all around this curve when I extended this bed this year. Now in front, this bed is a full sun bed. It has lots of that big ears or Helen von Stein stockies. It has right now foxtail lilies that are just beginning to bloom along with the Mount Everest allium bulbs. So it's kind of a play on different whites and textures, which, hey, if we look really close, there is a bee. Look at that big, big bumblebee, just like having the time of its life right there. That's why we plant flowers, not only for ourselves, but just for nature to enjoy. So all along here is a big sun-loving bed. But when we come around the corner, this gets full sun all day. Just a few feet away, this gets full shade all day. So really I've learned by trying different things here, I have to really make sure I pick shade-loving plants. So that's why I have boxwood. They can take the shade. They can also take slightly drier conditions once they're established. The Japanese maple, it likes it on the moist side, along now with these Japanese forest grass, the all gold that I'm gonna plant. These get about 18 inches tall and wide, but I have seen them get much bigger when they're in a happy area. I'm gonna say the ones I've planted before have gotten, I'm gonna say much more closer to maybe 24 feet, but also remember they're a grass. So they sway in the wind, they slightly lay over on their tips, on the tips of the leaves as they get taller. But what is nice about them is they're growing for foliage, as you can tell, because it's such a pretty foliage. See, Kip here even loves it. But that means even during the winter when they dry off, just like ornamental grasses, they have a nice texture over winter that just kind of sways in the wind. And that's what I really like about them. They really do have a year-round interest. You cut them back in the spring. Once I start seeing just a little bit of green showing at the base of the plant, I cut them back and then they flesh out all that new growth. Now, on ones I've had become more established, I am able to take starts of them later on and transplant them around. It just kind of depends how happy they are. But these I've spaced about 18 inches each apart because I want them to flow into each other as they continue to grow. That's really what I'm hoping for here. Now this area is a very easy area to plant in. I don't quite get tree roots up here, which is really nice. It's nice and loamy. It has really good soil. Over the years, I have top dressed it with compost every so often when I feel like I need to, but honestly, it's such a rich soil that I hardly have to do anything. Now, again, you're gonna notice this does not have mulch right here. I extended this bed a couple feet this year, more for mowing the way I wanted to mow. It was just easier to have it extended and it had a little bit more of an organic shape that way. But now, once I get everything planted, I'll top dress it with just hardwood mulch. So I'm taking these out, and these are a little bit different than those hostas. So with the hosta, you were seeing those roots were really encircling. These I want to show you, they're not near as tight with roots. So I really don't have to break these up much. I'm just slightly going around, exposing maybe the bottom tips of the plants, but I'm not going in hard because they don't have roots that are encircling themselves. So that's, to me, the difference. When roots are really tight and encircling, I break them up more. When they're very light capillary roots like this, I just slightly give them a little bit of a pick and they're good to go. We have biotone down in the hole. I'm just putting the soil back around to tamp it. And it's already nice and moist here, which I really like. And I made sure when any plant, whenever I water it, or when I plant it, I make sure to water it very well before I'm planting it in the container even. I want to have a nice saturated soil before I put it in the ground because it receives water better if it's been well watered before going into the soil. So you can see this area now, when these fill in, it's just gonna be a big bright pop of color. And sometimes in shade, that's exactly what you want. Shade already does have kind of a depth to it just from shade being shade. So being able to add a depth of color like this and a little pop of something bright, that's exactly what I've been craving right there. So I'm gonna come back to the shade bed and we're gonna plant a couple containers. I wasn't sure if I was gonna have time for this, but under this bed, you know, what's the one issue with a lot of people have with shade? You don't get the color, you don't get maybe the excitement that you do in some other perennial areas when you can have so many more options of what to plant. So in this bed I do have 2 containers, which is really one of the best ways to add color and variety and interest to any shade area. If nothing else, and you don't want to plant plants in the ground, put some containers in a shade area, put in patience, put something that is bright and easy to take care of. I'm gonna go through 2 pots that I'm putting together that are gonna match, but they both get a little bit more sun being on the edges of this garden. So the plants do really well in both shade and part sun. So right as you enter the pathway, you walk past the first container and then just down is the second container. They're simple concrete containers, they stay out year round. But inside of them, you're gonna now see kind of everything I'm gonna put. In the center, I'm gonna put a plumosa, which is just an asparagus fern. It can do well in some part shade. I'm gonna put a griffin begonia, one of my favorites. This one is mostly grown for, you can see the leaves, but look at the color of the leaves. In the shade, they really just kind of blow up, but they also kind of glow in the moonlight, which I really like. And then on each side of it, I'm gonna put some dragon wing begonias, just the red variety. The red is gonna strike really well against that griffin stem. Also, these do well in part sun to full sun, so they're really an easy care and they get so nice and big during the summer, even though I'm starting with small plants. So there's gonna be 2 of those red begonias. Then there's gonna be just an angel vine. This one's like a wire vine, it's the Nana variety, so it's a little bit smaller. This is just to add some nice foliage that's gonna drape over. These do really well for me in shade, and I've really always enjoyed having them here no matter what I plant. And then this is gonna be kind of my bright spot for trailing down the edges. What I really like about this, I started planting this I think last year. Triscantia is just a really easy one that's gonna have, look at that white color. And what's nice is it falls so perfectly down and it keeps kind of going around the container. So in this container, this was all new soil last year, and when it's really easy to work with, I don't always like to add all brand new soil. Obviously, I use always a good organic potting mix. I love Espomas, but what I do if I just want to be able to get maybe 2 years out of it instead of completely refill the container is I'll leave half of it in, add some new on top, and I will often supplement with just a nice plant tone. This to me is a great way to add some nutrients back to the soil if you're worried it's not going to have a lot in it. You know, that's the thing. Potting soil, once you start really using it year to year, it can become depleted pretty quickly because it's not in the ground where you're adding compost and everything year after year. So in this case, when you add some plant tone, it just adds some nutrients and good organic matter back to a nice big container like this. Also, I'm gonna add, of course, biotone and then just pot everything up. While plant tone that I put in first adds just some great organic matter for the whole season, the biotone is what's really gonna help those roots get a nice jump start in there. So I'm slightly spacing these thinking of the pathway where I'm standing as the beginning that you're really gonna notice. So I'm putting more the taller item slightly to the back, which is this griffin. This is one of my favorite begonias. And I'm just gonna sit it back there. I'm gonna add a little bit more soil as I'm going, which is just gonna be an easy way. Now, one thing I will say, if you wanna know good potting soil from bad potting soil, this Griffin, which was just a simple annual, it has what looks like pieces of perlite in it. It's not perlite. You know what that is? That's just foam. And I really hate when I find pieces of foam in any type of plant, because that means that's gonna go into my soil, and it's a type of plastic, and I don't like that. Now, in a container, we sometimes can't get by having things like this when we buy the plants because we don't know what's in there. But good potting soil, like this espoma here, the little pieces of white you see in it, these little tiny, they should crush up and become a powder, and these do, because they're actual perlite, which is a very natural occurring substance. And so that's gonna help aerate the soil, and it then just works back in. So that's what's wonderful about it. So it's too bad that this has pretty much styrofoam in it. I really hate that and wish it wouldn't. That's kind of a cheaper way to get by, but that's how you always know. If you're getting a potting soil that has styrofoam, it's not a good potting soil. It's not gonna be good for your garden overall. It's not gonna be good for anywhere you would dump it. It's not good for the plants even. So make sure you have a good quality potting soil, and your plants are gonna be much happier. So I'm putting some extra soil in there, and then I'm gonna put my plumosa in. Plumosa can also be a great house plant. So in the fall, I could dig this up, put it in a container, use it in the house, and then I can have it all season long, and you can keep it year to year really easy. It's in the asparagus fern family, so it's an easy one to keep. We're gonna put one of these red begonias on either side of it, which are really gonna grow in quickly and nicely. That's the great thing about annuals. When you plant them early in the year like this, they all fill in super quick. This is the pistachio white variety, by the way. The variety to me does not matter on this, but I just like the name pistachio white. You can see how vigorous, like already it's sending a new shoot up from the roots. This becomes super vigorous during the summer. And you can save starts of this really easily in the fall too, if you wanna make sure to keep it year to year. So I'm putting this in front, you can see how it's just gonna fall over. And then one of these wire vines right beside it here, which is also going to just fill in really nicely and act as a nice filler that's gonna spill out the front. But then we're gonna have all this layers of texture and foliage, and it's gonna just fill in this whole container to add pops of color with the red begonias all throughout the season against the hosta. So the big thing now will just be watering them as needed, which, you know, containers in general, as I'm sure we all know, they can completely change how they dry out week to week during the summer. So this is shaded, that helps a little bit, but it can also in the afternoon get a lot of sun kind of in the end, which is why I chose these plants. Both the begonias, the plumosa, the wire vine, all of that can take a good amount of sun. Some of it almost full, but at least part, if not. So that's why I really picked these, but we'll have to watch the watering. But you know what? All those other hosta I planted right behind here are gonna also need to be watched for watering just because they're a new plant. So until they're established, I'll be watering them, like I said, at least 1 to 2 times a week if we're not getting rain. If we're getting an inch of rain a week, I'll just check them and see as needed how they're drying out. But really everything now is kind of just set it, watch it, water it as needed, and enjoy it. That's the beautiful part of summer, right? So obviously I have more containers to plant. I have more gardening to do, but I'm glad you could come with me for a little bit so we could garden together and see what plants I'm putting in, and I can't wait to hear what plants you're putting in. So as always, let me know in the comments what plants you love. Share these videos around so other people can watch them too, and until then, enjoy the garden. If you don't do it now, when are you gonna do it?